This 1879 depiction appeared to be a simple gathering until specialists uncovered a distressing detail concerning the enslaved girl. Dr. Amanda Chen examined the canvas on her monitor at the Smithsonian's Preservation Facility in Washington, D.C. It was May 2024, and she had spent months evaluating 19th-century American artworks for an initiative cataloging post-Civil War pieces. This particular piece unsettled her. The artwork, created in 1879, depicted two youthful women, likely 18 or 19 years of age, seated near one another within a garden. One subject was a white woman, clothed in an intricate gown of blue silk, her fair hair arranged stylishly. The other was a black woman, wearing a more plain dress of brown cloth, her dark hair secured tidily away. What captured Amanda's attention was their posture. They were seated together on a stone bench, their shoulders almost connecting, each wearing a sincere smile. This was uncommon. Post-conflict art seldom portrayed black and white individuals with such apparent familiarity and parity. The piece had been gifted by the Whitfield lineage of Charleston, South Carolina. A small metal plaque was inscribed Margaret and Clara 1879. An accompanying letter stated, "This picture was discovered in our grandmother's attic in 1956. Margaret Whitfield was our relative. Clara's identity is not known to us. The artwork had been stored out of sight for many years." Stored out of sight? That wording lingered in Amanda's mind. She commenced a routine preservation assessment, employing X-radiography to inspect the painting's strata. When the radiographic image materialized, Amanda inhaled sharply. There, concealed under coats of pigment, were forms around the black woman's wrists and ankles, substantial, unambiguous forms that had been intentionally obscured. Iron restraints. Amanda leaned back, her pulse quickening. This was not merely a picture of two young women. Below the exterior lay emblems of captivity and servitude, purposely masked by paint. Why would a painter depict shackles only to conceal them? What was the true connection between these individuals? And why had this portrait been secreted away for so long? Amanda contacted Dr. Evelyn Washington, a scholar focused on artifacts from the slavery period. "I've discovered something remarkable, a painting from 1879 showing two companions, but radiography reveals manacles hidden under the surface. I must learn who these women were." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Transmit all you have. If there is a narrative here, we will discover it." Amanda started assembling documents, aware she was on the verge of revealing facts someone had endeavored to bury. Evelyn arrived 2 days later, holding dossiers concerning the Whitfield family. They convened in Amanda's laboratory, where the painting hung, deceptively serene. "Explain your discovery," Evelyn stated. Amanda revealed the radiographic pictures. "Observe the areas around Clara's wrists and ankles. The artist depicted substantial iron shackles, then purposely covered them with multiple paint layers. It required considerable work to hide them so completely." Evelyn moved closer, her expression growing grave. "So originally, Clara was portrayed in chains beside Margaret. Then someone overpainted the restraints to make them appear as peers." "Precisely. But for what reason?" Evelyn opened her folder. The Whitfields were affluent Charleston plantation proprietors before the war. They held over 200 enslaved persons. Margaret Whitfield was born in 1860, making her 19 in 1879. As for Clara, the name is absent from official Whitfield registries, but I located an entry in their plantation logs from 1860. "Girl child named Clara, born March 1860 to enslaved woman Ruth, assigned to house duties." Amanda felt a constriction in her chest. So Clara was born the same year as Margaret on the same estate. Yes, enslaved children were frequently designated as playmates for white children. They would interact in youth, though the dynamic grew imbalanced with age, Evelyn continued. By 1879, Clara would have been legally free. But Reconstruction was faltering. Jim Crow statutes were rising. Many black women had few alternatives but to remain in service to families that had once owned them. Amanda scrutinized the painting again. Two women raised together, one as the proprietor's daughter, the other as enslaved chattel. By 1879, slavery had ended, yet the shackles persisted, hidden beneath the pigment. "We must determine what specifically transpired in 1879, Evelyn said. Why was this portrait commissioned? Over the following week they investigated. Margaret had wed in 1881 and passed in 1943. Clara's history proved more difficult to follow. She appeared sporadically in city directories listed as a household worker. There was no matrimony record, and her trail faded after 1885. Then Amanda discovered a letter folded behind the frame's backing, dated June 1879. "Dearest Clara, I know this is forbidden. My parents would be enraged, but I cannot endure that we will soon be parted for all time. You are my oldest companion. Though society demands we be unequal, my heart knows no such distinction. May this painting safeguard our bond with the most profound feeling." They sat in stillness. "They commissioned this in secret," Amanda said, "to preserve their friendship. But the shackles—" She trailed off. Evelyn murmured, "Why paint Clara in restraints at all?" That was the query requiring an answer. Amanda inspected every centimetre of the canvas, discovering minute letters within the painted bark of a tree, TW 1879. Evelyn scoured Charleston archives, identifying Thomas Wright, a portrait painter with a studio on King Street, active from 1872 to 1884. More critically, the 1870 census listed Wright as mulatto, a free person of colonel, or who served both black and white patrons. "This alters everything," Evelyn stated. As a black man, Wright comprehended the complexities. He understood the significance of Margaret and Clara sitting together this way. Amanda re-examined the radiographs. So Wright painted Clara in shackles deliberately. He was issuing a declaration. Exactly. He was depicting the truth beneath the facade. On the surface, two friends; underneath, the reality that Clara remained bound, not by literal chains, but by social, economic, and legal confines. They located Wright's advertisement from 1876, T. Wright, portrait artist, all clients welcome. The phrasing indicated he would portray black subjects with dignity equal to white sitters. Then Evelyn found a newspaper article from August 1879. Local artist Thomas Wright has departed Charleston for Philadelphia, pursuing greater prospects in the North. Conditions have become untenable for Negro artists here. He left immediately after completing this portrait, Amanda observed. Not a coincidence, Evelyn affirmed. Wright painted something perilous. Margaret and Clara desired a memento of friendship, but Wright made it a critique, a truth influential individuals would not wish exposed. And then he was compelled to depart. Amanda concluded the thought. They needed to comprehend why this painting had been concealed for decades, who had hidden it, and for what purpose. The answer would prove more sorrowful than either could envision. This portrait was far more than a simple memorial of friendship. It was proof of a calamity the Whitfield family had strived diligently to expunge from the historical record. Now, nearly a century and a half later, that calamity was at last going to be brought to light. Evelyn understood that comprehending this painting necessitated locating Clara's own voice, personal letters, journal pages, any documentation of her viewpoint. She reached out to the Avery Research Center in Charleston, an institution specializing in African American history. Their archivist, Marcus, found the narrative compelling and initiated a search of their holdings. 3 weeks later, Marcus contacted her with an update. "We've uncovered something remarkable, a set of correspondence authored by women who were once enslaved, donated in the 1930s by a black church. Among them are a number of letters written by someone named Clara, dated between 1877 and 1880. Evelyn traveled to Charleston at once. The letters were delicate, inscribed in precise script on inexpensive paper, the only kind Clara could likely obtain. One letter, dated May 1879, was directed to Margaret. "Dear Margaret, I got your note about the picture. I am uncertain if this is a sensible idea. Your mother and father would be enraged if they learned we still meet in private, but I admit my spirit soars at the notion of sitting next to you again, as we did when we were girls. Before life instructed us, we were supposed to be divided. I will come. I will sit beside you one last time. Perhaps the painting will demonstrate that what we shared was genuine, even if no one else comprehends. Your friend always, Clara." Evelyn's hands shook as she read it. This verified that Margaret and Clara had orchestrated the portrait covertly, opposing the wishes of Margaret's parents. Another letter, dated July 1879, after the portrait's creation, revealed a grimmer reality. "Dear Margaret, I can no longer meet with you. Your father found out about our painting. He came to the place where I am employed, made threats, said awful words. He states that if I ever come near you again, he will make certain I am taken into custody, that I will be imprisoned or suffer a worse fate. I know you attempted to shield me, but we were naive to believe we could safeguard our bond. The world will not permit it. Please do not seek me out. It will only cause greater difficulty. I must vanish for your safety and for mine. Remember me with kindness, Clara." Evelyn felt ill. Richard Whitfield had uncovered the portrait and menaced Clara to sever her connection to his daughter. She located one final letter, without a date, written in a more unsteady hand. To the person who discovers this, "My name is Clara. I was born into bondage on the Whitfield estate in 1860. Margaret Whitfield was my companion from earliest youth. We were raised alongside one another, we played together, we confided in one another. When slavery was abolished, I wished the NGS would change. But liberty is not liberty when you remain trapped by need, by statutes that refuse you your due, by folks who view you as chattel even without iron bonds." Margaret attempted to remain my friend. She still tried to save our connection through a portrait, but her father shattered that hope. I departed Charleston because there was no alternative. I write this so someone will know that I was here, that my friendship with Margaret was true, that I was more than what they tried to force me to be. Clara. These writings transformed everything. This was not merely about a concealed painting. It was about two young women whose childhood bond had been annihilated by prejudice and a father who could not tolerate his daughter's affection for a woman once held as property. Evelyn showed the letters to Amanda, who sat wordlessly after reviewing them. "The restraints in the painting," Amanda said quietly. "Wright painted them because Clara remained shackled by destitution, by Jim Crow, by men like Richard Whitfield, who would menace and bully to uphold racial order. And Margaret understood it," Evelyn added. "That is why she concealed the painting after her father found it. She could not display it openly, yet she could not bring herself to eliminate it. It was all she retained of Clara. To grasp what transpired when Richard Whitfield discovered the portrait, Evelyn looked for his personal documents. The South Carolina Historical Society possessed the Whitfield Fay Millie Archive, which included Richard's correspondence from the 1870s. She discovered a letter Richard had written to his wife, Catherine, in July 1879. "I have uncovered something deeply troubling. Margaret ordered a portrait without our consent, depicting herself seated next to that Negro girl, Clara, who was formerly employed here. They are presented as peers, as companions. The painter, some mixed-race fellow from King Street, has produced an offense that implies our daughter considers herself the equal of former slaves. I have managed the circumstance. I found Clara and made it plain that any future interaction with Margaret will lead to serious repercussions. I have also seen to it that the artist has departed Charleston. The portrait will be obliterated." But the portrait had not been obliterated. Why? Evelyn discovered the explanation in Catherine Whitfield's diary entry from August 1879. "Richard insists I destroy Margaret's painting. He states it is shameful, that it displays an inappropriate attachment between our daughter and a Negro, but I cannot bring myself to do it. I witnessed Margaret and Clara grow up together before the war, before everything altered. They were like siblings. I know society declares it was improper, that Margaret should never have cherished a slave child as she did. But they were children, blameless of the separations we adults fashioned. Margaret has been devastated since Richard forced Clara away. This portrait is all that remains to etch. I cannot demolish it. I have concealed it in the attic instead. Perhaps one day, when these acrimonious days have faded, it can be seen for what it genuinely is, a testament to a friendship that the world would not endure. Catherine had preserved the painting. Despite her husband's commands, despite societal condemnation, she had safeguarded this evidence of her daughter's love for Clara. Evelyn relayed this finding to Amanda. Catherine Whitfield was implicated in slavery. She profited from it her whole life. but even she could not bear to annihilate this painting. "What became of Margaret after Clara departed?" Amanda inquired. Evelyn had uncovered that as well. Margaret married in 1881 to a man her father selected. She had 3 children and lived a conventional life, but Evelyn found a reference in her granddaughter's memoir, published in 1965. The granddaughter wrote, "Grandmother Margaret was a sorrowful woman, often remote. She kept a secure drawer in her writing desk that no one was permitted to open. After she passed, we discovered it held letters from someone named Clara and a miniature portrait of them together. Mother commanded both be burned, stating they were inappropriate. I regret that we did not preserve them. They appeared very important to grandmother." "So Margaret kept Clara's letters her entire life," Amanda said softly, "locked away, hidden but cherished. And the small portrait they mentioned, that was likely a copy or a photograph of the L.A. RGR work. The family destroyed that, but they were unaware of the original hidden in the attic. The narrative was coming into sharper, more heartbreaking focus. 2 friends, ripped asunder by bigotry, one threatened into exile." Evelyn and Amanda traveled to Atlanta the following week, bringing images of the artwork and every document they had uncovered. Michelle was a woman in her 40s, with Clara's same calm, observant eyes, a feature recognizable from the portrait. They met in Michelle's comfortable living room surrounded by books. Michelle listened, her expression shifting from curiosity to profound recognition as Evelyn outlined the entire story, the painting, the hidden shackles, the letters, and the lifelong separation of Clara and Margaret. When Evelyn finished, Michelle sat quietly for a long moment. "All my life," she began softly, "I knew my great-great-grandmother Clara had come to Augusta from Charleston. The family story was that she left a difficult past behind to start anew. We knew she was strong, resilient, a founder of our line. But the details, the friendship, the portrait, we never knew any of that." She walked to a bookshelf and retrieved a small, old wooden box. "My grandmother gave this to me before she passed. She said it held the only things that came down from Clara. Inside were a few fragile items, a simple hairpin, a pressed gardenia flower, brittle with age, and a small hand-stitched sampler with the initials C and M intertwined. We nev. Knew who M was," Michelle said, her finger tracing the faded thread. "It was just a mystery. My grandmother said Clara would sometimes hum a particular hymn when she was mending clothes, in the sweet by and by. She said it sounded like a memory, not just a song." Amanda felt a shiver of connection. That hymn was published in 1868. It was a song of hope and reunion beyond earthly sorrow. Michelle nodded. "It makes sense now. This changes everything for me. It's not just a sad story. It's a story of love that refused to be erased, even when they were forced apart. Clara carried that love with her. She built a family with it." Evelyn shared the final documents, Samuel's letter donating Clara's papers, and the brief, dignified obituary. She found a good man. She raised a family. She was loved and respected in her community. But she carried this silence with her. "She carried Margaret with her," Michelle corrected gently, "not as a silence, but as a private truth. We do that in our family. We carry our history quietly. It's how we survived." Then Michelle posed the question that had lingered for both historians. "What about Margaret's family? Do they know?" Evelyn explained that they had made contact with descendants of the Whitfield line, a family now scattered across the country, largely unaware of this part of their ancestry. Their response had been mixed. Some were hesitant, others quietly wanted to know more. "Would you be willing to meet them?" Amanda asked. "Ked, if they are willing to meet you, this story belongs to both of your families now." Michelle considered this, looking again at the entwined initials on the sampler. "Yes," she said finally. "I think Clara would have wanted that, not for blame but for acknowledgement, for the story to be whole." The meeting was arranged for 2 months later at the Smithsonian, coinciding with the painting S unveiling in a new exhibition titled Beneath the Surface, Hidden Truths in American Portraiture. The restored portrait would be displayed alongside the spectral X-ray and infrared images revealing the shackles, the tears, and Thomas Wright's hidden inscription. The day before the opening, a private viewing was held. Descendants from both families stood before the painting. On one side, Michelle and several of her relatives. On the other, a few Whitfield descendants, including an elderly man named Robert Whitfield III, Margaret's great-grandson. There was an initial palpable stiffness in the air, a weight of history. Then Robert, leaning on a cane, spoke. "My grandmother mentioned a locked drawer," he said, his voice thin but clear. "She said her grandmother Margaret was a woman of deep, private sorrow. We never understood its source. I apologize for what my ancestor did. Richard Whitfield's cruelty." Michelle stepped forward. "Thank you for saying that. But we are not here for apologies from the living for the deeds of the dead. We are here for them." She gestured to the port. "Rate, to see them together again, as they should be seen." They all turned to look. The conservators had done minimal restoration, leaving the surface as it was, a beautiful, conventional scene of two young women in a garden, but on digital screens flanking the painting, the hidden layers glowed, the graphic shackles, the ghostly tears, the powerful secret message in the shadows. Though the chains are hidden, they remain. Amanda, standing to the side with Evelyn, watched as the two families began to talk, not about the past, but about the painting itself, the skill of the artist, the love that had risked so much to create it, and the strange, painful journey it had taken to bring them all together in this room. Later that evening, Evelyn found Amanda looking at the portrait alone in the now quiet gallery. "It's done," Evelyn said. "No," Amanda replied, her eyes still on Clara's and Margaret's faces. "It's not done. It's just now being seen. For the first time in 145 years, they're being seen honestly. The truth isn't just underneath the paint anymore, it's right here in front of us." The next day, the exhibition opened to the public. Visitors would read the story of Clara and Margaret, of Thomas Wright's courageous artistry, and of the decades of silence. They would see the image of two women side by side, and know that for all the pain hidden beneath, the friendship itself, the love that refused to be painted over, was the most enduring truth of all. When they showed her the painting, she gazed at it for a long time without speaking. "That's my great-great-grandmother," she finally murmured, her voice hushed. "We heard stories that she was enslaved as a child near Charleston, that she left suddenly and never spoke much about that time. But we never understood the reason." They presented her with the letters, the historical papers, and the radiographic images that unveiled the concealed restraints. Michelle wept as she read Clara's own words, discovering the depth of the friendship with Margaret and comprehending the origin of her ancestors' enduring sorrow. "She lost her friend," Michelle stated, her voice thick with emotion. "A childhood companion torn from her because of hatred and bigotry. She carried that grief for 43 years, until the day she died." "Yes," Evelyn affirmed softly. "But she also endured. She built a new life. She raised a family. You are here because Clara possessed the strength to begin again in Augusta." Michelle nodded slowly, absorbing this. "What of Margaret's line? Are there living descendants?" "Yes," Amanda replied. "The Whitfield family line continues. They are still present, primarily in Charleston. We have not yet reached out to them. We wish to speak with you first." "I want to meet them," Michelle said, her tone resolute. "I want Margaret's family to know that Clara never forgot their ancestor, that their bond was genuine, that it held meaning." Evelyn made contact with the Whitfield family, detailing their discovery regarding the portrait. After some initial reserve, Margaret's great-great-grandson, David, consented to a meeting. They arranged to gather at the Smithsonian, where the artwork was being readied for display. David Whitfield arrived appearing somewhat uneasy, a tall man in his 50s with fair hair reminiscent of Margaret's in the portrait. Michelle was already present, standing before the painting, her eyes fixed on the image of her forebear. David approached cautiously, viewing the portrait properly for the first time. "My family donated this piece years ago. We were never told the complete history, only that it had been stored away in an attic." "Your family attempted to bury this story," Michelle said, her voice measured yet firm. "Your ancestor, Richard Whitfield, threatened my ancestor. He forced her to flee Charleston. He destroyed her friendship with his own daughter." David looked downward. "I am aware," he said quietly. "Dr. Washington shared the documents. I feel shame for my forefathers' actions. But Margaret, my great-great-grandmother, she tried to protect this. She kept Clara's letters locked away her whole life. She kept letters while living in security, Michelle responded. My ancestor lost everything, her closest friend, her home, her entire childhood. She had to rebuild in an unfamiliar city with nothing. The air grew heavy with tension. Evelyn interceded with gentle diplomacy. Both women were casualties of a society that would not permit their connection. Margaret lacked the power to openly defy her father without facing ruin. Clara possessed no means to resist. The true antagonist was the prejudice that rendered their friendship an impossibility. They stood together quietly, observing the painting where their ancestors sat shoulder to shoulder, smiling, frozen in an instant of parity that the world had denied them in reality. Finally, David spoke. I wish to help make this right. My family has means. We could establish an educational fund in Clara's name. We could support this exhibition. We could ensure her narrative is shared alongside Margaret's. Michelle contemplated his offer. Clara did not desire charity. She wanted respect, equality, the simple right to befriend someone without facing menace and brutality. I understand, David replied, but I cannot alter what has already happened. I can only strive to honor these women's memory now. They tried to safeguard their bond through this artwork. I can help tell their story. At last, Michelle gave a slow nod. Very well. But Clara's story should be told completely, not softened, not made palatable, the truth about the shackles, the threats, the loss, all of it, David agreed. Over the following months, they collaborated on planning the exhibition. Michelle supplied family photographs of Clara's descendants and records from Clara's life in Augusta. David provided Whitfield family archives, including Catherine's diary and the account of Margaret's later years. The exhibition would present the painting alongside the radiographic images, revealing the hidden restraints. It would display letters from both women and trace the separate paths their lives took after being torn apart. It would also feature contemporary photographs, Michelle before her classroom, teaching African American history, David at his architecture firm in Charleston, designing community housing. Images of two people living full lives made possible by ancestors who survived unimaginable circumstances. The exhibition title was chosen with deliberate care, Hidden Chains, a friendship preserved in paint. Before the public opening, Michelle and David stood together one final time before the portrait. They appear content here, Michelle observed quietly. In this single moment, captured by an artist who understood their truth, they got to be simply two friends sitting together. Right gave them that gift, David agreed. Even while he painted the reality of the shackles underneath. I hope they knew, Michelle said, her eyes lingering on Clara's face. I hope Margaret and Clara somehow understood that 145 years later, their descendants would stand here together, telling their story. Honoring what they tried to protect, they stood in reflective silence, two individuals linked by a friendship their ancestors had shared briefly before the world severed it. Now they were working together to ensure that friendship was finally remembered and given its due honor. The exhibition opened at the Smithsonian in March 2025. The gallery was filled to capacity. Historians, art conservators, descendants of enslaved persons, journalists and visitors who had heard of the shackles concealed beneath the portrait's surface. The painting hung at the center of the main wall, illuminated by a soft spotlight. On either side were large displays. To the left, the radiographic images showed the restraints around Clara's wrists and ankles, the concealed tears on her cheeks, and Wright's secret inscription within the layers of paint. To the right, the final version presented to the world, two women seated peacefully together, smiling. The exhibition text explained, in 1879, two young women who grew up together on a South Carolina plantation, one as the owner's daughter, the other as enslaved property, secretly commissioned this portrait to preserve their childhood bond. Margaret Whitfield and Clara were both 19 years old, 14 years after the legal end of slavery. They hoped this painting would prove their connection was real, even as the society around them insisted they remain separate and unequal. The artist, Thomas Wright, a free man of color, painted a profound truth. He first depicted Clara in shackles, with tears upon her face, illustrating the reality that legal freedom had not released her from the binds of poverty, racism, and social constraint. Then, he painted over these elements, creating the serene scene the women could actually keep. But beneath the surface, the truth remained. Permanent, undeniable, waiting 145 years to be revealed. Visitors moved through the exhibition in a respectful quiet, reading the letters from each woman, learning of Richard Whitfield's threats and understanding how the painting had been concealed for generations. One section detailed Clara's life after Charleston, her marriage, her children, Samuel's letter donating her precious few mementos. Another outlined Margaret's life, the expected marriage, the locked drawer holding Clara's correspondence, her granddaughter's account of burning those letters after Margaret's passing. At the exhibit's heart stood Michelle and David, no longer just descendants of a divided past, but custodians of a shared story, a testament to a friendship that, though it could not survive its time, refused to be forgotten by history. The exhibition dedicated a significant section to the narrative of Thomas Wright. It detailed his other known portraits, his relocation to Philadelphia following the painting's completion, and his eventual death in 1891. Several of Wright's other works were displayed nearby, and preliminary infrared analysis indicated they, too, likely contained concealed layers of meaning beneath their serene surfaces. Scholars posited that Wright had developed a quiet, consistent practice of embedding social commentary within his commissioned work. Yet the most profound moment resided in the exhibition's final chamber. There, large-scale photographs depicted Michelle and David standing side by side before the restored portrait. Their contemporary stories were presented with the same dignity as those of their ancestors. Michelle had contributed a personal statement. "My great-great-grandmother, Clara, endured slavery. She survived being violently severed from her dearest childhood companion. She withstood direct threats, profound poverty, and the relentless scourge of racism. In Augusta, she constructed a new life, raised 4 children, and bequeathed to her descendants a legacy of unyielding resilience. I became a teacher of history because Clara, despite every obstacle, believed in the transformative power of education. She understood, in her bones, that an honest reckoning with the past is the only foundation for a more just future." This painting was nearly lost to obscurity forever, just as the stories of countless black women have been obscured, erased, or deliberately forgotten. But Clara's story persisted. It survived in fragile letters, in a truth painted beneath a lie, in the quiet memories whispered through generations. Now her story will finally be known. David had written a companion reflection. "My great-great-grandmother, Margaret, attempted to safeguard a friendship the world deemed illegitimate. She ultimately failed. The prejudices of her era and her own father's brutality shattered the bond she and Clara had nurtured. Yet, she never ceased to care. For 60 years she preserved Clara's letters in a locked drawer, powerless to honor them publicly but incapable of destroying them. Margaret was, by birth and privilege, complicit in a system of oppression, even as her heart held affection for someone that very system was designed to crush. Her story is complex and uncomfortable, but it is vital. It demonstrates how the poison of racism harmed everyone, even those who materially benefited from it. I cannot undo the actions of my ancestor, Richard Whitfield, but I can choose to honor what Margaret tried to protect and bear witness to what Clara so courageously survived." The exhibition quickly became one of the Smithsonian's most attended. Media coverage was widespread and sustained. Academics initiated deeper studies of Thomas Wright's catalogue, uncovering further concealed narratives in his art. The story of Margaret and Clara ignited public conversations about interracial childhood bonds, the enduring injuries of racism long after slavery's legal end, and the intricate, often painful relationships between white and black women in the Reco. Instruction Era South. 6 months after the opening, a package arrived at Michelle's home in Atlanta. Inside was a letter from a 92-year-old woman in Charleston named Patricia. "Dear Michelle, I am 92 years old, and I am Eliza, Clara's youngest daughter. Yes, your great-great-aunt. I am still here. I saw the news about the exhibition, and I wanted you to know that I remember my mother. She passed when I was only 3, but I hold one memory. She showed me a small drawing she kept hidden, a simple sketch of herself with another young woman sitting close. She told me, "This was my friend Margaret. The world told us we could not be friends, but we were. You remember that, child? The world is often wrong about who is worthy of love." I have kept this drawing for 89 years. I send it to you now. It belongs with the portrait. With trembling hands, Michelle unwrapped the package. Within, carefully preserved, was a small pencil sketch on time-worn paper. It depicted two young girls, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, their hands clasped, their faces bright with smiles. At the bottom, in a youthful script, was written, "Margaret and Clara, 1867. They had created this drawing themselves as children, a full 12 years before the formal portrait, when their friendship still existed in a space of innocent grace, before the full, crushing weight of racial doctrine descended upon them." Michelle contacted Amanda and Evelyn immediately. The precious sketch was added to the exhibition, displayed in a special case alongside Patricia's letter. A poignant testament that even a 3-year-old child had absorbed her mother's lesson about love across the color line. Michelle traveled to Charleston to meet Patricia. The elderly woman wept upon seeing photographs of her mother's descendants, 4 generations she had never known, all thriving, educated, and carrying Clara's legacy forward. "Mama would be so proud," Patricia whispered. "She always said learning was everything, that we had to grow our minds and never let anyone make us feel small." "She learned that from her childhood," Michelle explained gently. "Margaret taught her to read when they were little, before they were caught and punished." Patricia nodded, a light of understanding in her eyes. Mama never forgot her. Even at the end, she spoke of her childhood friend. She said, "Some bonds are so true that not even the world's cruelty can fully break them." Due to extraordinary public interest, the exhibition was extended for an additional year. School groups visited regularly, educators using the story of Margaret and Clara to teach about the enduring legacy of slavery, the persistence of prejudice, and the enduring human yearning for connection across manufactured divides. Michelle and David, through their shared labor of remembrance, developed a genuine friendship, a bond forged in the crucible of their ancestors' history. They spoke jointly at academic conferences, co-authored articles, and became advocates for the honest, unflinching teaching of complex histories. 5 years after the exhibition's debut, Michelle published a book, Hidden Chains, My Great-Great-Grandmother, Story, and the Friendship That Survived in Paint. The work wove together Clara's letters, the painting's technical and historical analysis, and Michelle's personal meditations on the meaning of this recovered narrative. In the book's final chapter, Michelle wrote, "I teach my students that history is not merely a catalogue of dates and events. It is the story of people, of relationships, love, loss, and survival. Margaret and Clara loved one another as children, before the world instructed them that they must not. They tried to preserve that love in a portrait, but the racism of their time proved stronger. Clara lost her friend, her home, every familiar touchstone, yet she did not allow that loss to define or destroy her. She built a new life. She raised children. She passed down stories and values that resonated across 5 generations to reach me." The shackles Thomas Wright painted were not merely historical artifacts. They represented constraints that still exist in different forms today. But Clara's resilience, her fierce refusal to be defined solely by what was done, to her, that too survives. It lives on in me, in my students, in everyone who learns her story and resolves not to let such histories be forgotten. The portrait found a permanent home at the Smithsonian, the radiographic images permanently mounted beside it. Visitors from across the globe came to witness it, to see the friendship presented on the surface, the shackles concealed beneath, and the profound truth Wright had safeguarded for 145 years. And in Atlanta, in her classroom office, Michelle kept Patricia's childhood sketch on her wall. She would show it to her students, telling them of 2 little girls who held hands and drew pictures together, blissfully unaware of the forces that would later strive to tear them apart. "But look," she would tell them, pointing from the sketch to a photograph of the formal 1879 portrait. They fought to stay connected. Margaret commissioned that painting. Clara safeguarded the letters. Thomas Wright painted the real story underneath. And now, all these years later, we know. We know their story. We know they mattered. We know their friendship was real. She would pause, letting the weight of it settle in the quiet room. The chains were hidden, she would continue, her voice clear and steady. But so was the resistance. So was the love. So was the truth. And truth possesses a singular power. It endures. Even when buried beneath layers of paint, even when secreted away in attics, even when the powerful strive to erase it. Truth survey. Vez. And so do we.